come and have a look at these land masses.
Land masses? I don't see... I see what you mean.
Now, doesn't that remind you of anything?
Remind? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, looks familiar somehow.
Yes. Hey, Ben, look, that bit looks just like Malaysia.
Give over. No, hang on. Isn't that... Well, it looks like South America, but it can't be, though.
But there is a similarity.
Nonsense, how could there be?
This is unbelievable. That's surely Africa.
Yes, certainly, and that is Malaysia.
Ridiculous. There must be some reflection of Earth.
No, it can't be. There's nothing to reflect on.
And now, my dear Dr. Barclay, I suggest you look at that piece of paper I gave you.
Paper? Oh, yes. You knew.
Certainly.
Knew what?
He has correctly written down what we have just seen, and he did it before we saw it.
It's a simple confidence trick, that's all.
No, I know when he gave me the paper. Now, you clearly know something more about this situation. Can you be more explicit?
Yes, sir, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can. You see, millions of years ago, there was a twin planet to Earth...
For heaven's sake!
Hello and welcome to Who Watches Who, a Doctor Who podcast with me, Matthew, and as always, we are joined with...
Hi, I'm Scott.
Hello, Scott. This week we are covering the 10th Planet, parts 1 and 2. Parts 3 and 4 will be next week. We are covering this because, of course, this is very famously William Hartnell's Regeneration episode. And it is October, and we're still of the belief, at least, that the Centenary special is coming out this month, although I have no idea, there's, no information. Surely...
supposedly, we're recording this on the 5th of October. I almost forgot the month. It doesn't feel like October, but...
Yeah.
We're recording this on the 5th of October. It doesn't feel like it's going to come out this month.
Yeah, it's insane. Jodie's regenerating this month. That doesn't feel right at all. But Hartnell, for sure, is regenerating this month, or should I say this month in 1966. Ho, ho, ho. Because this episode first aired on the 8th of October, 1966. 55 years, 11 months, and 28 days ago. Almost on the 56th anniversary. It aired on a Saturday, and of course, at this time, the US President was one Lyndon B. Johnson, with the UK Prime Minister being one Harold Wilson, both Democrats and Labour respectively.
I thought you were going to say Harold Saxon.
I wish. There was, interestingly enough, on the 8th of October, nothing happened but one thing, and that was Wyoming's Jerry DePoyster kicked 3 field goals. He kicked 3 field goals over 50 yards, 2 of them at 54 yards and 1 at 52. Yay, sports. Could you guess as to what's leading the box office? I would be remarkably surprised if you could.
Let me think back to what I was doing this weekend in 1966. The Incredible Hulk.
Close. No, it was Dr. Zhivago. Dr. Zhivago is a 1965 epic historical romance film directed by David Lean with a screenplay by Robert Bolt, and it's based on the 1957 novel of the same name by Boris Pasternak. The story is set in Russia during World War I and the Russian Civil War, and stars Omar Sharif in the title role as Yuri Zyagov, and a married physician and poet whose life is altered by the Russian Revolution and subsequent Civil War. Julie Christie plays his love interest, Laura Antipova. It's interesting because this was the olden times. This film released in 1965, however, maintained itself at the top of the box office in April, May, June, and then again back again in August, because films back then just were in theatre. That's where you saw them, so they stayed a long time.
Yeah, many would eventually have wound up on streaming services maybe a year later in 1966.
Yeah, but right now it's still holding strong at number 1 in the box office. It's interesting, when it came out, apparently it kind of got mixed and middling reviews because this film is over 3 hours long. Yeah,
I'm looking it up right now. 200 minutes for the 1992 re-release, but... Yeah, 200 minutes.
It's a long film. But that's the most interesting thing. So I turned my eye back to history to see what else was happening on the 8th of October.
Can I say what else happened on this day in history? Well, in 1966.
Okay.
Well, it's related to Doctor Who, in fact. William Hartnell films his regeneration scene while Patrick Troughton is lying across the studio from him.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this was... They filmed it 3 weeks before it actually aired, which is wild to think about.
Wow, yeah. That is, yeah. But in 1871, on the 8th of October, the Great Chicago Fire kills an estimated 300 people and destroys over 4 square miles, which is 10 kilometers, of buildings, and the original Emancipation Proclamation got destroyed in the fire as well. Not super chill. In 1873, the first women's prison run by women opens at Indiana Reformatory Institute. Then, in 1918, American soldier Alvin York single-handedly attacks a German gun nest, killing at least 25 people and capturing 132 Germans by himself.
Jesus Christ.
It's some fucking Call of Duty shit. In 1927, The Second 100 Years, a silent short film release starring Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. It is the first ever Laurel and Hardy film with them appearing as a team. Released on this day as well in 1927. In 1945, the microwave oven patent by U.S. inventor Percy Spencer comes into action. In 1962, North Korea reports a 100% election turnout, with miraculously 100% of the population voting for the Workers' Party. Democracy at its finest. In 1992, the video game Mortal Kombat is first released as a 2D fighting game by Midway Games. Just a short, 60, 70, 80, 20-odd years from Hartnell regenerating, 28 or something like that. You know, not too shabby. I'm sure he would have loved Mortal Kombat.
Oh, yeah. Hartnell famously...
Big gamer.
A big gamer. He had a big gamer headset with a little microphone coming out of it.
He loved G Fuel. In 2012, the film Lincoln, directed...
Sorry. William Hartnell also said the N-word on that Fortnite bridge. I'm telling you.
In 2012, the film Lincoln, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Daniel Day-Lewis, based on the biography by Doris Kane Goodwin, premieres. Did you ever see Lincoln?
No, I never watched that movie. It sounds boring.
Yeah, a lot of modern-day Spielberg doesn't appeal to me at all. He really was, especially in 2012, in his what I like to call dad genre phase, when he's just making movies for, old man dads to sit and watch while they neglect their family. But that is the only interesting things that happened on the 8th of October. Besides, of course, the release of The 10th Planet, which is a hilariously out-of-date title now. But Scott, you take us into the making of.
I mean, it's also a weird title because Doctor Who has a million planets.
It's talking about the solar system, though. The 10th planet, because Mondas was a twin planet to Earth or whatever, and then they just kind of fucked off. And so it's the 10th planet of the solar system. But there's only 8 planets in the solar system because Pluto's not a planet. So...
Yeah, it's a dog.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. Kit Pedler wrote this episode, and we spoke briefly about him in our review of Tomb of the Cybermen, which we did 1 year ago, almost to this day.
Oh my god.
Which is... I know. We only did 2 black and white episodes so far. This one and Tomb of the Cybermen. Both Cybermen episodes. So.
We've done so much Cybermen episodes, to be fair. They're I think our most visited villain is Cybermen. We've covered so much Cybermen.
So Kit Pedler was born in 1928 and died in 1981. He was only aged 52, too young. He was a writer, broadcaster, and a medical scientist.
That's another Doctor Who alum dying in their 50s.
Who else?
All of them. Every other person that we've covered on the show that's dead dies in their 50s.
Yeah, a lot of the writers seem to die really young.
Didn't the showrunner, what's his name, die really young as well?
John Nathan Turner in his 50s as well.
Yeah. Douglas Adams died in his 50s.
Yeah.
Like every person that worked in Doctor Classic Who dies in their 50s. It's tragic.
It is.
It's a curse.
So Kit Pedler's first BBC work was on the science fiction... Well, no, sorry. It was on the Science and Philosophy series Horizon in 1966, which is still on to this day, apparently.
Wow.
I've never heard of it.
I've never heard of it either.
Horizon filmed footage of Pedler at work in his lab, and the producer was impressed with his unlimited wealth of ideas and suggested he should turn to science fiction. Jerry Davis, who was script editor in Doctor Who between 1966 and 67, wanted to phase out the historical stories for more science-based stories, so he quickly brought in Pedler as a scientific advisor. And have you reached any of the historical episodes of the classic series yet?
They're like the historical episodes are like the first episodes.
Yeah.
I've covered a lot, especially in Hartnell's run, and his first season is like nothing but historicals, and then Daleks suddenly show up.
The historical episodes for me have never really hit, apart from maybe the Aztecs. The Aztecs is a pretty good example of a historical, but apart from that, none of them really hit for me.
Even in modern Who, historicals don't tend to hit for me either.
Well, I would say the historicals work better in the Jodie Whittaker era. The historicals,
but that's like the exception. Like,
yeah,
because Oh my God, sorry. It's off topic, completely. It's just because you've mentioned Jodie, and I'm not going to get it off my chest. Like I have to just get it off my chest. We were watching whatever the fuck the episode's called, where she like disses Graham completely.
I think it was called "Can You Hear Me?"
Yeah, Can You Hear Me?
Yeah.
And, it's a terrible episode. It's really funny. It's probably one of the worst episodes of season 12. It's incredible. But there was just one moment that I completely forgot about, and I have to talk about it now because it was driving me insane. And I was honestly in like a fit of laughter when it happened. Jodie has her hands tied up above her.
Yeah, I remember this.
She knocks the sonic screwdriver out of her pocket, and it jumps into her hand. It is the most ridiculous fucking thing I have ever seen, and it killed me. It was incredible. I do not know, like, that script in that's like the set production, the special effects, that entire episode feels so rushed and not thought out. It's remarkable. Like,
yeah, that episode has a good premise, the whole mental health aspect, but we're focusing on people who just don't really matter to the main plot. It'd be better if the companions were dealing with these mental health issues rather than Ryan's best friend who we never met before.
Yeah, it's
I like the idea. It's bad in execution, and it's that scene at the end with Graham and the Doctor. Yikes!
So bad. Yeah, it's such a bad episode. My God.
But Kit Pedler's first story idea concerned a computer in the post office tower which went mad and decided that mankind would be better off as slaves to the machines. And this became the last story of season 3, The War Machines. And you might... the War Machines actually got brought up just recently in Doctor Who Flux, where Chibnall apparently thought that unit started around this time, in the 60s, even though... So basically, Chris Chibnall just rewrote canon.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
he's never done that before.
The whole canon got mixed up with that War Machines episode, that reference in Flux.
Right.
I don't understand why he did that.
Yeah, that was the only bit that's been messed up with canon recently.
Yeah.
And actually ever in Doctor Who. Doctor Who's always had such a consistent canon. I was surprised when this inconsistency came up. It's like somebody really messed up and didn't do their homework.
Yeah, you watch this episode set in 1986, and when you go off to watch, like, The Impossible Astronaut, both feature people trying to get to the moon for the first time. And you're like, okay, but it doesn't make sense canon-wise, does it?
Yeah.
The War Machines was thought of because he was deeply upset about the post office tower ruining his view of London Eye Line, and the story depicts his own ideas about where society was heading, and he is quoted as saying, "I see the modern city as a great technical mechanism. To get people to serve in it, we give them the illusion of freedom, but the things being done to them to get them to work are quite horrific. In multi-story beehives where entire lives are ordered by system analysts, it slows them and degrade into the individual to be concerned in these terms." So yeah, he had a deep hatred of where humanity was going with these machines and technology.
To be fair, he doesn't sound too far off.
Yeah. The producer Innes Lloyd at the time and script editor Jerry Davis loved the War Machines and asked Pedler to write his own opening story in the 4th season. This was the first story filmed for season 4, but it was the second aired. The Smugglers, which opened season 4, was actually a holdover from season 3. So this is the first story of season 4 technically.
The Smugglers is also lost to time, or at least it's not on BritBox.
Yeah, it's one of those missing episodes, and apparently it's not that great, so we're not missing much. The 10th Planet was commissioned on the 17th of May, 1966, with scripts needing to be delivered on the 6th of June, and then broadcast in October. So that's like 20 weeks between it being commissioned and aired. Insane turnaround.
Yeah, that's a lot of turnaround for sure.
Davis suggested the idea of Earth having a twin planet, and Pedler's first pitch was a concept about star monks who came from Earth's twin planet on a religious quest. This was turned down because it was too close to the meddling monk from the Time Meddler, which we will be covering soon.
Yes.
Pedler was very interested in the story of a space capsule suddenly losing its energy due to cyborgs draining its power. Jerry Davis loved this idea because the whole 60s was obviously during the whole space race, which NASA and the USSR were competing. So this is a proper time to be doing a space story, even though it's obviously outdated like 3 years later.
Yeah.
This story was like 20 years later after this episode aired. Attack of the Cybermen came out, which acted as a prequel to this episode. We just covered Attack of the Cybermen like last month.
Right, yes. Interesting.
So, even in Attack of the Cybermen, this episode is still canon, technically.
Which means that in Doctor Who universe, they never, they go to the moon in the 80s a lot.
Yeah, but then in the Matt Smith era, the first time we went to the moon was in 1969, the proper time.
Real lifetime, yeah.
The whole canon makes no sense, man.
They should cancel it. That's a bad show.
They should. It is a bad show. Davis suggested that Pedler should forget about science fiction concepts and concentrate on his years as a scientist instead. Pedler was inspired by a conversation with his wife, who was also a doctor, about spare part surgery, and they conceived the idea of someone with so many mechanical replacements that he didn't know if he was human or machine. And the episode of the title was his wife's idea, the episode's title being The 10th Planet. Jerry Davis also had a deep interest in the problems of space, of science changing and endangering human life, and together they had multiple meetings to refine what would become the Cybermen. The idea of the Cybermen evolved and moulded into a cautionary tale about people's dependence on technology to solve problems, and the idea that although the principle of replacement surgery is itself good, it can be subject to abuse. Pedler said the Cybermen were to be strong and immoral, but the antithesis of everything that he conceived to be human. And this, I think the Cybermen are interesting characters, though. Although recently, I think sometimes the Cybermen go a bit too robotic, and they forget about the human aspect of the story, I think.
See, the Cybermen becoming robotic, I see as in fucking with the Timeless Children or whatever, the lone Cyberman's plan is to go fully robotic, and I find that believable because their whole thing is stripping away humanity, and what's the best way to strip away humanity? Have no humanity and be a full robot man. That's pretty cool. But I think the Cybermen kind of suffered the same issue as the Daleks or the Weeping Angels. The more, especially in Modern Who, the more times they come back, the less scary they are. The more often there are, the less scary there are. The lone Cyberman was cool as fuck because it's one Cyberman, and you're like, holy shit, spooky guy. If you go to an episode, one of the many episodes, where there's just an army of Cybermen, you don't really feel the same threat. I always think Doctor Who works way better with smaller scaled stories where it's a spooky thing or a fucking, an unstoppable beast or whatever. But when it's huge armies going to war with one another, I kind of well, I doubt they're going to win. You know, I don't think the Cybermen are going to take Earth this time. But I mean, I get why you have those stories because you want to have that spectacle and that flash sometimes. But yeah, the Cybermen for me, they've never been my favorite villain. I did like them a lot as a kid for sure. Like I had a Halloween costume and stuff like that. You know, toys, whatever the fuck. But never been like. I'd say they're probably in the top 10. Definitely in the top 10 for me for out of villains.
Yeah, my favorite Cyberman stories are always the one where it's always about the humans.
Yeah.
The human side, you know, the human are fearful of being converted. And
Yeah.
all that. Like,
What's interesting with the Cybermen, I think out of all aliens, I give a shit about their political and social structure. Like, I do not care about them at all. Cyber leader, who gives a fuck? I don't care about cyber leader. Like, whereas if it's like the Daleks and the Emperor Dalek shows up, or fucking shouty man in a wheelchair whose name has left my head right now.
Davros.
Yeah, Davros, my god. Or if Davros shows up, I'm like, oh Christ, I'm on board. This is cool. But like Cybermen, I find them really boring to listen to. Their voice drones on, and it takes them like what the fucking was it Attack of the Cybermen where it's the cyber leader and he's talking this.
I think
slowly.
I think this slow Cyberman came in with Tomb of the Cybermen.
Could be Tomb, yeah.
With in Attack of the Cybermen, they had like normal voices. We were just like normal people, but are faderized kind of.
Yeah, but it's the slow voice with the Cybermen. I'm like, fucking spit it out. Like,
we'll get to them here, but I really like their voices in this episode. It's really unique, and they obviously brought back the designs of this episode into the Doctor Falls, one of Pierre Capaldi's final episodes, which was really fucking great.
Yes, which ties in as well with his regeneration being with the first Doctor. Right.
Yeah. The elements of the plot was inspired by Dan Dare comic strips, which were published in Eagle Comics in the 50s. And Eagle Comics is only recognizable to us because Judge Dredd came from Eagle Comics. Those elements are a space-traveling planet plundering other planets, and another story had a world attacked by its twin planet, which converges every 1,000 years. Pedler worked on part 1 and 2 alone, but eventually asked Davis to work with him as he found it hard to get scripts done under the tight deadline, and I don't blame him. Like, 3 weeks to write 4 episodes is a nightmare.
That's so much. Yeah, that's so much.
But because Davis was a BBC employee, he couldn't commission his own material as he was limited to a certain number of scripts per year. So he basically co-wrote all 4 episodes, but he's only listed for episode 3 and 4 as co-writer. They split the script copyright and the rights to the Cybermen, so each get 50-50, which is, I think, is fair from what I've heard from the production of the story. The Cybermen really needed to be a success for the show because Terry Nation, who created the Daleks, kept on talking about removing the Daleks from the show because he wanted to make his own Dalek movies at the time, which he wanted to do separate from Doctor Who.
Such an interesting choice, you know?
Yeah, so imagine Doctor Who without the Daleks, that would be insane.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be so
A sequel story to this, The Moonbase, was immediately put into pre-production and just aired 15 weeks later.
My god.
15 weeks! And yeah, this was due to success and also a smart budgeting to just reuse resources, although the Cybermen were completely redesigned for the Moonbase, so the resources weren't reused. And yeah, season 4 was weird because there was 2 Cybermen stories and 2 Dalek stories in season 4.
Christ.
Which is a lot of...
That's a lot.
And season 4 has 43 episodes, and 8 of those episodes were with the Cybermen, 13 with the Daleks. So that's 21 episodes altogether with the Cybermen and Daleks, which are like half a season. Which is like, yeah, fair enough, I guess. Because it is the 6th season, I guess people want to see more Cybermen and Daleks.
Yeah, and it beats them going off to like Peru in the 1500s. Like...
Yeah. And yeah, of course, this episode is famous for its regeneration, which comes at the end of episode 4. We'll obviously talk a bit more about that next week, but William Hartnell, between 1965 and 1966, Hartnell was becoming increasingly difficult to work with. He felt unsettled by the departure of his original cast and crew and got into many arguments about the direction of his show. He threatened to leave multiple times, as he believed Doctor Who contained an increasing amount of evil for a children's show, and he wanted more whimsical storylines. He also didn't get along with actors who played his new companions, Ben and Polly, and he was also beginning to get more ill as the series went on. So basically it sounds like they wanted to get rid of Hartnell badly.
Yeah, because, I mean, to be fair, like, Hartnell signed on to Doctor Who when the idea for it wasn't like an educational kids show, you know?
Yeah.
And so the show was changed at that point, and he's like, this is not the show that I thought I was making anymore. I could completely understand why he wants to leave. But, you know, especially considering everybody that was working on the show with him has already gone. Honestly, it feels like at that point I would be in the same boat where I'm like, I feel like I don't belong on this boat like anymore. But making it hard to work with, a dick move on his part, isn't it?
Just complaining to the directors and all that. Just there's no need for any toxic workplace environment. So it sounds like they wanted to fire him all along during these years. Yeah. And then he became ill, and then we're like, that's the perfect excuse. That's why we need to get rid of him, because he's becoming ill. The director of this episode, Derek Martinez, was interviewed as saying, Bill has always been bad on his lines, but he was steadily deteriorating. He always claimed that he had carte blanche on the series with his storylines and the casting, and if he didn't want to go on, the whole thing would fold up. I am Doctor Who, and Doctor Who is me, he would say. It was a very bitter blow when he found out he was being replaced. It was a brave move by the producer Innes Lloyd. Innes was very charming and easygoing man, but Bill dug his own grave by being difficult with him. It was great indignity and very humbling for the old boy, but a great relief to everyone else that a man of Pat Troughton's calibre was taken over.
Jesus Christ. I am Doctor Who, and Doctor Who is me. What an ego trip.
Yeah.
Like,
I know.
Jesus. Oh, Christ, yeah. Nightmare. It must have been so, like, especially shooting, like, the actual Regeneration. I bet you Hartnell was bitter as fuck.
Yeah. Like, when I watched the Adventures in Space of Time, which is the biopic about the making of Doctor Who and William Hartnell, they don't go over any of this stuff. Basically, they just say, oh yeah, he was ill, and then he was about to leave, and that's how he left the show. He was too ill to go on.
Yeah.
They basically whitewash him a little bit. They just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that he wasn't a grumpy old man.
And we'll talk a bit more about his behaviour on set very soon, sadly. Another factor for the recasting of the role was due to drop in ratings of the series. Basically, this show was getting like 5 million viewers per week, which nowadays sounds great, but back then it was very low, very low. It was like one of these episodes of The 10th Planet was rated 77th for the week.
Oh my god.
Which is, and that was an improvement from like previous week's storylines. So, yeah, it's a wonder how this show lasted 26 years with ratings like that.
Yeah.
During the break between Season 3 and Season 4, the BBC realised that they needed a new leading actor for the series, and in mid-June of 1966, both Hartnell and the BBC agreed that Hartnell would return to the series one last time. This was seen as unusual at the time, as only American shows would really replace cast members. And on August 2nd, 1966, the Daily Telegraph announced that a tougher Doctor Who was chosen, with Patrick Troughton's Doctor having stories with greater emphasis on science fiction and will have fewer comedy episodes. So yeah, it's a very strange thing for Doctor Who to constantly change its lead actor.
It is, and it's definitely a fucking, like, Hail Mary swing for the fences. Like, if we don't nail this, fuck it, we're done. And the casting of Patrick Troughton as well, I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more next week. But to have that, you know, go from William Hartnell, who legitimately spends 90% of his episodes asleep, you know, because he's so ill and he can't do anything, to Patrick Troughton, who's like fucking dancing and running and there's explosions, you know, it's a burst of energy the show desperately needed. Like,
there's a behind-the-scenes story about this episode being made that, in a conversation between William Hartnell and one of the Cybermen, basically William Hartnell was like, showing off his tap dancing moves, and he tapped danced across the entire studio, according to one of the Cybermen. It's like, where was that energy throughout this entire your entire run as Doctor Who?
The cameras come on, and he's like,
Although, to be fair on him, it is tough to do a TV show when you're doing like 4 days rehearsal, and then you're shooting it as if it was live.
Yeah.
It's hard to maintain that balance, because even me reading on this show, I stumble my words, and that's just me reading.
Yeah, although to be fair, you've not rehearsed it and are not a trained actor.
That's true. But yeah, with that said, shall we jump into the 10th Planet, Part 1?
Oh boy, here we go.
Looking terribly worried, Doctor.
Am I, my dear? Yes, I'm afraid I am rather worried.
What is it, Doctor? What's up?
Well, you see, Ben, I know what this planet is and what it means to Earth.
What does it mean to Earth?
Well, that pretty soon we shall be having visitors.
Visitors? What, here? Well, who do you think's bringing them? Father Christmas on his sledge?
Oh, quiet, boy, quiet.
So our episode begins, as every episode does in Classic Who, with our theme song. And William Hartnell is the first, actually not the first, well, I mean, he is the first Doctor, but he is our last Doctor to visit on the podcast. And so this is our last Doctor Who intro to talk about for the first time. What do you think about the OG? But... Well, come on. What do you, for the Doctors, what do you think about the OG Doctor Who intro?
Yeah, it's pretty decent, for a time, especially, like the Rorschach kind of thing going on.
I always think it's like a lava lamp.
Of course you do. You're a very groovy person.
Like the things in a lava lamp separating, but yeah, it is solid. The theme song, I think, is probably up there as one of my favorite ones. It's obviously it set the example when every other one's an imitation of this one, but some of the imitations are a bit shit.
Yeah, it's really fucking good. It's a bit too short for my liking, but
yeah,
it works.
Yeah, I prefer a longer intro as well. But our actual episode begins with a rocket being launched out into space, and then cutting to said space station, where there's a bunch of white guys just saying a bunch of gibberish to each other and talking about the weather. Have you got anything to say on this scene?
The episode title is actually computer printout graphics, which look really interesting for a story because it's very unique. They never tried anything like this, where the bunch of letters appear like.
Yes, I actually liked that. Yeah, I thought that was cool. Stylization.
It's a nice little touch, and it adds some intrigue into this story. It's like, yeah, this works. It really works. We should try a bit more like that.
But there's not too much to be gathered from the scene where they're in the space station talking. There is one interesting thing, and that is, of course, the people inside that space rocket. One of whom is of a non-white complexion, which I was honestly really shocked to see, because this is 1966 British television. Yes.
And if we cut like 2 years ahead in Tomb of the Cybermen, where we discussed, remember last year we discussed the one black person, and he was a silent, strong slave, basically.
Yeah, you said the N-word.
I said the N-word ending with the letter O in context to a character he played in another Kit Pedler TV show called Doomsday.
Cancelled.
But the director, Derek Martinez, wanted to have an international flavour to reflect the multinational international space command. It represents the individuality of the Cybermen have lost, and it's also really realistic for the time,
Yeah.
Of course, black people would be going to the moon eventually.
In 1986, when everyone was going to the moon.
Earl Cameron, who played the black actor in the spaceship, was Bermudan and played the first black astronaut on television in this very episode, which is really cool. He was the second black actor to have a major speaking role in Doctor Who. The previous one was just in the story before this, the Smugglers, I believe it was called. The character Earl played was actually conceived as a white Welshman, and obviously the casting director was like, hey, why not just cast whoever? It doesn't really matter who plays each character, does it?
Yeah.
Earl Cameron was one of the first black film stars in Britain and had roles in the entertainment industry between the early 40s right up to 2017.
Jesus
and he
Christ.
died He died in 2020 at the age of 102.
Nice.
And Earl's agent in the 60s actually became Hartnell's son-in-law.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of upsetting because William Hartnell was highly prejudiced against him, with Anna Key Willis saying that she and Michael Craze were ashamed of him, saying, basically William Hartnell was not good on set towards black people or Jewish people or no.
I mean, an old man in the 1960s turned out to be racist. I am so shocked by this news.
But Earl Cameron basically says he was unaware of Bill's behaviour, and it really didn't bother him because he's faced prejudice his entire life,
career.
And on an interview on the DVD of the 10th Planet, he looks surprisingly good for like 90 odd. He looks amazing for 90 odd. On the DVD, he basically says, "Hey, that's William Hartnell's problem, not mine. It's his racism to deal with,
Yeah.
And the spaceship interior was actually based on a Gemini capsule that we'd actually do in NASA and all that. So
cool.
Yeah, a little bit of history for Earl Cameron, who's, he's treated. He doesn't get much to do here in this episode, but he's treated as an equal, which is
he's
really
not
nice
he's
to
not
see.
treated as a black character. He's just treated as a guy that blows up in the spaceship, like.
Spoilers.
We also cut to some soldiers looking around in a periscope as the TARDIS appears in the snowstorm. The most peculiar snowstorm you ever see in your life. The snow machine is apparently right next to the fucking camera because you can see it getting pushed out onto the set. It's very interesting. But we can cut into the TARDIS with our first look and our last look. One of our last looks at William Hartnell as the Doctor. And he's doing his thing still, isn't he? He's got his wee hands. They're not even holding on to his jacket anymore. He just lets them dangle. And he's saying, at the end of every sentence.
Yeah, he is very Yoda-ish, isn't he?
He is extremely Yoda-ish, yes.
So, speaking of all the personnel and the crew of the space station, whatever you want to call it, they do some really good character work here where we actually... open up in a shot of like bikini models basically, and it gives a representation of one of the characters is Italian and he's reading a comic book, actually a Marvel comic book, Sergeant Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, which was really big comics in the 60s. But we get this decent sign of just here's his basic personality and it's represented on screen. It's good film language to do that.
Yeah. Inside the TARDIS, there's not really too much going on. Again, everyone's wrapping up for the cold weather, and they wrap up the Doctor, and he's like, cool, let's all step outside. And then when they step outside, you made the note of saying, it's not William Hartnell on the outside of that TARDIS.
Yeah, so William Hartnell was apparently on holiday on the day of filming this scene. So yeah, he was replaced by a man called... Sorry, give me a second, I wrote it down. He was played by a man called Gordon Craig, and he would eventually play William Hartnell's role in the third episode, where William Hartnell was just too sick to go into work. So
oh wow,
he technically became one of the few actors to play one of the first Doctors. So
yeah, crazy. I've not seen episodes 3 and 4 yet, but I'm guessing the Doctor's not really in episode 3.
In episode 3, William Hartnell was too ill to go in, so episode 3 he's not in it at all, and then episode 4 is animated, so episode 2 is the last time we see Hartnell as the Doctor completely.
Jesus.
Which is wild. And he doesn't do much, does he?
He doesn't do anything. That's insane. My God.
So I really like this South Pole setting. Davis and Pedler wanted this setting because of the atmosphere it gave. And the South Pole is so inhospitable that nobody would expect anything to come out of these howling blizzards. And obviously the setting reminds us of The Thing, which we mentioned off screen.
It reminds me of The Thing quite a bit. I mean, even like it being a black and white reminds me of The Thing from Another World, like the original one, It's like this, there's something about black and white and snow. It just makes it this, unsettling horror theme to it, instantly. And it's wonderful to look at.
Yeah, and the set looks pretty decent. We actually filmed this at Ealing Studios rather than doing their own setting because Ealing Studios was massive and it allows for multi-leveled floorings.
Damn.
Because there's like this whole section of the studio which is underneath the studio. Later on, there's multiple levels to the space center. It works really well. Apparently, the actor who played Ben had a lot of trouble with the snow, however. He says on this episode, I met my first wife on it. She was the production assistant. This is Michael Cray speaking, who plays Ben. Just prior to Doctor Who, I fell and broke my nose. I smashed it right across the bridge and it blocked one of my channels. So in between doing the Smugglers and the 10th Planet, we had a 6-week summer break and I went to hospital to have his channel cleared. And they nearly killed me. They burst a blood vessel in my head.
Oh my
I
God.
had to stay in hospital for about 3 weeks. Then we went back and started pre-filming at Alien Studios for the scene where we first meet the Cybermen. And all this snow is blown about, all polystyrene. I said to this girl, for God's sake, when you put the wind machine on, can you avoid it going to my face? Because if it goes up my nose, I'm terrified it will start bleeding again. When she put the bloody thing on me, the snow went straight into my face. I still married her about 3 years later. So
Nightmare.
So
That
that's
sounds
it.
like a fucking nightmare. Oh my god.
yeah, I know. But a happy story out of it, apparently.
Yeah. Well, he says it's his first wife, so I don't think it ends well. But
True, but still.
interesting. I don't actually know too much about these companions. What are their names? Ben and Polly.
Yeah, Ben and Polly, they don't do anything of note. They're just basically known for basically becoming the first companions to see the Doctor regenerate. That's basically all they're known for.
Interesting. They sound
And
like...
also, obviously they pop up again in Peter Capaldi's Regeneration episode, I believe.
I have to watch it again. I don't remember that episode too well off the top of my head, but yeah, they must do. Do they, or is it
Because-
just the Doctor by himself?
I think there might have been like deleted scenes or online exclusive scenes for that episode where obviously it's set during episode 4,
Yeah.
Twice Upon a Time, like the Doctor just goes on to another adventure with Peter Capaldi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. But anyway, they make their way towards the base, and the men spot Polly through the scope, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a woman out there!" And then they all get really horny. It's gross.
Yeah.
They also spot the TARDIS and then open up the doors to let them to come inside, because they're like, who the fuck are these people? How are they outside in the South Pole? We should probably let them in. Then we get this really cool shot that goes on for like 30 seconds of watching people climb into the hole. It was amazing. Like, so
Oh
compelling.
yeah, it's classic Doctor Who. They don't know when to cut a scene,
Yeah.
and you're watching them be very careful.
We need
as
to make
well.
sure that we know every character made it in. Because, like, how do we know that all of them made it in if we don't see it happen?
Like, I was watching a 5th Doctor episode the other day, and they spend about 2 minutes of the entire episode just focusing on characters driving up to places. And it's like, yeah, just get on with it, please.
Yeah, it's fun. They get brought in, and they get lined up and spoken to by one of the commanding officers. I think he's like a sergeant or something.
Yeah.
This is where we find out that Ben is a soldier, or at least where I found out that.
Yeah, he was in the Royal Navy, which apparently is a big thing in this first episode. I don't really care about these characters, so...
Yeah. They also talk to the Doctor, and the Doctor's like, I'm deaf. Which I don't think was actually scripted. I think that was just Hartnell yelling at the actor. They continue, and they call in the CO, who comes and yells, and he's like, oh, I don't know why you're here, but you've been lying. You didn't come here on a spaceship. We're going to send you down to lock up, and I'll deal with you later. It's, we're covering this bit really quick, but we're almost halfway through this episode, believe it or not. I love Classic Who for how interestingly paced it can be.
Yeah, and this kind of presents a problem with the episode itself. The Doctor and his companions are basically held captive the entire time and don't have any agency towards anything what's happening in the plot.
Yeah.
They just kind of stand around and observe for the entire episode.
Yeah. But when they get locked up, they find Polly and Ben are like, oh, we can go home after this because we're back on Earth. And my question is have they just been trying to get home the whole time and Hartnell is not fucking letting them because he's been dropping companions like crazy? Like,
Basically, a lot of the companions in the classic era just really wanted to go home. Like, Ian and Barbara eventually wanted to go home, but the Doctor, the Doctor's TARDIS is so unpredictable, but he never lands in the correct time and place. Tegan also wanted the same thing. She just wanted to fucking do her day job at Heathrow Airport. The base here is actually modelled off of Cape Kennedy, which is a NASA base, which I really like the set here. There's some neat levels to like our stairs, and it looks really nice for 60s Doctor Who especially. There's no wobbly sets in this episode.
Yeah, it doesn't look too cheap, it doesn't look so much like a set. I mean, it still is at times very clearly a set, but it's not as blatant as sometimes Classic Who fucking loves to be. But this is where the companions find out that they are not in fact able to go home because they are in the distant year in the future, 1986.
So the story
what do you
was
think?
originally...
What do you think life's going to be like in that year, Scott?
Oh God, I imagine we're all going to have robots in our houses. I think one of the, I don't know, like just the imagination of the 20 years on from now, just funny to see what it's like in the 60s. Like just imagining the future in the 60s. It's funny.
Yeah, I mean it's weird that we're going to be in the 60s soon enough, isn't it?
True, yeah.
Like we're like, when we're in the 60s, we're gonna be like Hartnell. We're like the same age as Hartnell, by the time we get to the 60s, and we can just go around being like, and
be racist. Like we always wanted to be.
Yeah, I mean it never goes out of style.
So yeah, the story was originally set in 2000, but it was changed in 1986. The novelization was considered to be set in 2000, though I don't know why they've changed it back to 2000. If anything, they should have changed it back to just like 1969 or something.
Yeah, but they didn't. I mean, they didn't know there was going to be a moon landing in 1969 when they shot.
I mean,
this.
Yeah, but when they did the book to make it the 2000s, it makes even less sense in terms of the canon of the Doctor Who universe.
Yeah, but like, who reads the books? Who gives a shit?
I do sometimes. There's also some fun dialogue in this episode which explains why there's not as many extras as you would see in an actual space station, They basically say that the sergeant is doesn't like people and just wants as few people around as possible, which is really funny.
Yeah. This is also speaking of the moon, where we find out that they've just got an expedition coming back from the moon. I guess it's implied it's the first time. I read it as like they go forward and back to the moon all the time now in 1986, but
the guy is like, haven't you heard?
Yeah,
as if it's like breaking news.
Yeah, I guess, or yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it's certainly setting the future of 1986. Every set looks like it's in the 60s. Everyone talks like they're in the 60s and dresses like they're the 60s, but trust us, it's the future. The calendar said so.
No, there's a character who comes in later on with a big afro. You must have missed him.
So the episode continues, and we get a lot of space stuff where the two pilots are in space, and they're like, hey, we're in space. Where's the fuck's Mars? And then the people on Earth are like, hey, they're in space. Why aren't they looking at Mars? And then they look through it, and they're like, that's not Mars we're looking at. That's some sort of 10th planet. And the music stinks. I do actually quite like the music in this. It's the music, the soundtrack in this episode is pretty decent.
I think most of the music is stock music, so it's from something else.
That's
which
very
is
good.
Unfortunate, because I really like music.
Yeah. But this section is a lot of just back and forth between them trying to figure out, what is they're looking at, how they're looking at it, and trying to fix the spaceship because it's getting weak because this other planet's coming in. It's affecting the gravitational pull. There's a lot of science blabber. At a certain point, William Hartnell's like, oh yeah, I'm in this show, and goes over and gives a note to the captain, but he doesn't look at that note until it's far too late. And yeah, that's basically all that happens. There's some cool shots. There's a cool shot with the rocket as it's like trying to adjust its trajectory over Earth, and it's like from the rocket's point of view, and you see it like spinning, and there's like jet fuel and the fucking Earth and stuff like that. It's very impressive for Hartnell Doctor Who. It's a very technical shot.
There is some pretty impressive stuff in here, like that shot as well, and also the model planet of the twin planet, but looks really impressive for the time. There's nothing happening in this section.
4 minutes of just fucking back and forth. We're at a ship. Look out the thing. I'm going to read out some numbers now. Okay, science.
This whole episode is probably takes place in real time, I would say. It's very odd. Yeah. And also, this is back in the day where obviously doing different takes cost them a lot of money, so we try to keep it as far as possible as one take, and you just listen to Earl Cameron mess his lines up a little bit sometimes. Yeah, but like, to be fair, he's not messing up as bad as Hartnell does. Like, no. Hartnell sometimes will just start a sentence again. Like, And also, give it up to the BBC for allowing Earl Cameron to have... I think he has most of the lines on the rocket ship. Yeah, he has loads of lines, yeah. And this is obviously 1966, and I would imagine like most American markets would have been like, no, we can't have a black astronaut to have many lines. Yeah. Like, selling this to America would have been hard I would imagine. For sure. Good of them for allowing Earl Cameron to have those lines, man. Yeah. Just nothing to talk about. William Hartnell coming in, just being like, oh yeah, can you look at this note? I know. Why does I guess it's to prove to them that he knows what's going on. Yeah. But wouldn't it make more sense to be like, hey, this ship is going to explode and that 10th planet is Mondas and this is why, and just say it, so that when it does happen, they can be like, hey, you did try to warn us of that. Oh, fuck, we should have listened. Rather than being like, you handed this note when this emergency was going on. Why did you think we were going to read it? For all we know, you're asking it to go to the bathroom. You're 1,000,000 years old. If this was like David Tennant, he'd just be rushing about, pushing all the buttons. Yeah, be like, shut the fuck up. I know how to save this. William Hartnell's Doctor is so like meek in this episode. Just like, I'm gonna write down a little cute little note that's probably really nicely handwritten. Wee smiley face at the end of it, like a little love heart. Yeah, they're gonna die, by the way. Smiley face, like. On the DVD, we basically make the comparison that basically the general of this fucking snow cap face, he's the main character of the story. Like, the story would be exactly the same if the Doctor and his companions weren't here. Yeah. It's very bizarre for a Doctor Who storyline just to have no involvement with the main cast, and it feels like Chris Chibnall got a lot of inspiration from this. Yeah. So our episode continues, and believe it or not much else happens in this episode. We get a long period of time where people are really confused about this 10th planet showing up. And the Doctor the entire time is like, read my note. And they read the note and they're like, oh my god, he just completely 100% predicted what's going on. And then the other guy's like, it's just a trick. Ignore him. And Hartnell's like, no, let me explain, 100 million years ago. And then they're like, shut the fuck up, old man. And he just goes like, he just doesn't talk again for the rest of the episode. That's literally his last line, before it's... the Doctor's whole thing in this episode he knows what's going on for some reason, and he can't explain what's going on for some reason. Yeah, he doesn't want to tell anybody. He's just a dick. But the episode continues. We watch a spaceship landing in the snow for a really long time as the guy who's from New York. That was a terrible New York accent. Let me try that again. I'm walking here. That guy and the Italian guy, who's, I'm not sure if he's a genuine Italian, are told they have to go investigate the TARDIS. They go out and do that. We also get some stuff with, is he like a general back home or something? The guy that's on the telephone call, that's like, the Doctor knows about the 10th planet. That's so strange. Do this thing. Yeah, he's some kind of general back home. I don't know. We cut to him a few times, but I'm not really sure what's going on. It's a bit vague. Yeah. But as the only interesting thing that I can think of that's worth talking about, unless you have some, is the Cybermen showing up. Basically, because that's all that goes on. Because they just kind of fucking waste time for a while, then the Cybermen show up at the end. So they're trying to get into the TARDIS, and we see them approaching in the distance. I think it's quite a cool intro for the Cybermen, because they are silver and white against this white snow in this wide shot, so you can barely make them out, and they look kind of human, but kind of not, and then they approach, and they fucking karate chop the shit out of a dude.
absolutely.
Ever like Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah,
Karate chop
legit.
Command.
And then one of them is like, do you want to know, it'll be a really funny prank? And he grabs the guy's cloak and he puts the cloak on. I'm not making this up. The Cyberman wears the cloak and hides in front of the TARDIS, like he's like the fucking big bad wolf in Little Riding Hood. You know, the other guy shows up. He's like, what silver skin you have? You know, the other guy shows up and he immediately takes off the disguise that he just put on and karate chops him, and the other guys show up from behind the TARDIS. There was no reason for that disguise reveal thing. It's just extremely funny that it happened.
Yeah, it is very funny. And next episode, they just all show up wearing the same disguise.
Yeah.
So Pedler and Davis's first idea for the Cybermen was of silver figures stalking through the snow, and it was inspired by Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, which is obviously jump forward like 50 odd years later, and we do an episode where the Cybermen are literally Frankenstein monsters.
Yeah.
Initially, Davis and Pedler wanted the Cybermen to look more mechanical, with arms and legs being broken up, with the arms coming out of the waist. However, this wasn't economically doable, so we settled on making their shapes definitely human, but with more machine-based characteristics. Yeah, and they forgot about the Doctor Who's budget.
I feel like that's an issue a lot of the writers for Doctor Who run into, is they forget about Doctor Who's budget. But arms on the waist for Cybermen is a fucking hysterical design. Like, just imagining like a Cyberman, like imagine like Russell T Davis's Cyberman, you know, and they're the exact same except their arms are on their waist. You know, It makes them infinitely more funny.
The Cybermen design works for me because you remember they're human because they all have the human body types.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
If their arms were coming out of their waist, you just forget that they're human.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the Cyberman's whole deal isn't that, you know, humans are ugly and we don't like the way they look. It's humans' emotions are weak. They're not trying to strip away the human design. They're trying to strip away the human emotion. You know, they're totally fine with their limbs.
Yeah, Pedler's suggestion was that they should be emotionless to emphasize their souls being corrupted by machines. And to talk about the costume for a bit, because I really like these costumes. Sandra Reid was the show's new costume designer at the time, and she and Kit Pedler had lots of meetings about cybernetics so she could design the Cybermen. To make them appear taller, she fitted a light to their head, which was apparently supposed to light up, but, you know, BBC's budget couldn't really get it to light up properly.
Yeah.
The head was a stocking. The Cybermen actors could only see through tiny holes. And in the script, they were just to have normal, handsome faces, apparently. They were just supposed to be like normal human beings. But then they thought, yeah, we're covering up all the human elements because that makes more sense for the characters, I would say.
Yeah.
The chest unit was intended to represent a replacement for hearts and lungs.
Very Darth Vader.
And Sandra Reid had forgotten to make gloves for Cybermen, but Gillian James, who was in makeup, painted their hands silver. Oh wow! And I think this really works at making you remember these people were actually human beings. Their human hands remind you that they were human beings once. And the Cybermen actors struggled with the heat of the studio. They kept on fainting, and they couldn't really sit in costumes, so they just had to awkwardly lean against the wall during breaks.
Oh Christ!
Which, yeah.
They tell you, the people that wear costumes in classic Who are fucking heroes because they drown, they pass out, they can't sit down, they get tortured for probably a not very good paycheck.
But yeah, I really like this Cyberman design. It really works for me.
I think it's fine. For me, it's a really dated design. Like, I like it for its retro-futurism look. I like it for, like, a time capsule from the 60s. But, you know, it is a cheap-looking costume. It is a costume that, to me, like, is like, this is a costume. I don't ever buy, like, oh, it's a Cyberman in front of me. I buy, it's a man in a Cyberman costume.
Yeah, but isn't that the intent? It's a man in a costume, basically.
No, but like I don't believe that it's like a Cyberman. I believe that it is a actor. Like, you know.
So in 2006, I watched Doctor Who Confidential after the first episode of a revival series with the Cybermen. I think it was called The Age of Steel or something.
Yeah, that sounds
I
right.
remember watching Doctor Who Confidential and they showed clips of the 10th Planet, and I was terrified of these Cybermen. You know, their voices and their look are just there's something that's just so scary about them to me. Like, I can't really put it in words, but it's just like, they kind of feel like they're humans, but still, there's so much of it that they aren't humans. It's really creepy, in my opinion.
Interesting. No, I don't have that effect. I look at it and I'm like, that's cool, I guess, but it just looks old. That's like I remember seeing it when I was a kid as well, seeing the original Cybermen and being like, oh my god, they look so weird. Like, I wasn't scared of them, but
I think they work even better in the new series when they came back in the Doctor Falls and Peter Capaldi's season 10 final.
I
They
think
really worked in that episode.
it was refreshing to see them come back. Because, especially with Peter Capaldi, I was not a fan of his Cybermen designs. The skinny Cybermen. But, you know, as like a one-shot and a little throwback, I'm a fan of the design, for sure. It's just, for me, I prefer the other more mechanical-looking Cybermen.
Yeah, that's fair. And you know, you just listened to us give our opinions of this almost 60-year-old episode. And what's interesting is, the reviews at the time... one review was, after episode 1 aired, Anne Lawrence from the Morning Star said, "It is a little alarming to turn to the latest Doctor Who episode and discover it in 1986 an international space station in Antarctica will be controlled by a bunch of moronic, trigger-happy Americans. Let us hope this serial gets better. It could hardly get worse."
Oof, fuck me. Oh my
And then a
God.
few weeks later, she would complain that the Cybermen gave her children nightmares. So
Great.
I imagine there was no Doctor Who in that household after a while.
Yeah, I'm guessing she wasn't a fan of Doctor Who, but, you know, Doctor Who's at its best when it gives children nightmares. That's how you know it's
Yeah.
been a good episode of Doctor Who. Like, yeah.
But yeah, speaking of the next episode, do you want to jump into the next
Yeah,
episode?
let's jump into part 2 of the 10th Planet. Forgot what it was called there.
Cannot live with you. You're different. You've got no feelings.
Feelings? I do not understand that word.
Emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir?
Come to Mondas and you will have no need of emotions. You will become like us.
Like you?
We have freedom from disease, protection against heat and cold, true mastery. Do you prefer to die in misery?
But look, surely it's possible for us not to lose all its energy.
It is inevitable.
Then you don't mind if we all die.
Why should we mind?
Why? Why?
Because millions and millions of people are going to suffer and die horribly.
We shall not be affected.
Don't you think of anything except yourselves?
We are equipped to survive. We are only interested in survival. Anything else is of no importance. Your deaths will not affect us.
But I can't make you understand. You're condemning us all to die. Have you no heart?
No, that is one of the weaknesses that we have removed.
So, episode 2 begins, as all episode 2s do in Classic Who, immediately where episode 1 ended, with the Cyberman looking into the camera lens. Which, actually, we didn't talk about. Episode 1 doesn't end on a cliffhanger with the Doctor dying. It just ends on a cliffhanger of monsters here.
I think they probably forgot the Doctor's in this episode.
True. To be fair, I forgot that as well. The bulk part of the first half of this episode really is focused on the Cybermen. They come into the base hilariously in disguises that somehow work. Nobody notices that they're like a foot taller and are robots and silver and have these huge packs on their chest. They just assume that they are soldiers that aren't in uniform and are still wearing their cloaks.
Yeah, we don't notice until they take the hoods off.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Polly screams because every classic companion has to scream at one point or another.
Yeah.
You don't know the situation is scary unless the companion screams.
Exactly. Especially if it's the woman. The woman has to scream. It's so funny. It honestly is fucking hysterical. A random soldier also gets shot and killed because it is classic Doctor Who. Somebody must be shot by a gun. They get killed by the Cybermen. And you know, not a lot is going on in this first half of the episode. We're cutting back and forth between Europe and this base. In Europe, it's like the guy who's like vaguely in charge being like, something's going on in the South Pole. There's also something going on with this 10th planet. Don't worry about it. But we find out a lot about this planet Mondas from the Cybermen. And we find out that it's like a twin planet to Earth. It's basically the exact same. The people there are basically the exact same, but they lost orbit and they go fucking zooming away. And when they were away, they developed all these new technologies and decided they wanted to become cybernetic and lose the weaknesses and stuff like that and turn into Cybermen. And here we are. What do you think about the idea of Mondas in general for like a Doctor Who canon perspective? You know, because technically in New Who, Mondas Cybermen still exist, which means Mondas is a twin planet to Earth in Doctor Who canon.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the fuck is going on with Cybermen in New Who. Like, when they were introduced in New Who, it was like, oh yeah, this is an alternative Earth, which is more interesting to me than a twin planet, you know? 'Cause technically an alternative parallel world is a twin Earth, if you think about it deeply.
Yeah.
But, whenever Cybermen appear, I'm never sure if it's from the alternative Earth or if it's from Mondas. It's very confusing in my mind.
I'm like that a lot with fucking Jodie Cyberman so much. I'm like, I don't know where these guys are from.
Yeah, it's so inconsistent. I'm never sure what's going on or like when the Cybermen are, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, there's also like an interesting like different factions of Cybermen, because there's like the Mondas Cyberman, there's the Cyberman from the future and Jodie's one, there's the alternate timeline Cyberman, there's the fucking
Cyberman.
There's the Talos Cyberman, there's the Capaldi Cybermen, which are just regular people Missy was turning into Cybermen. There's like these are like all different. There's what were the Cybermen from Neil Gaiman's one that were on the moon? Where were they from?
I don't remember an episode, to be honest.
Yeah,
with you. I just remember Warwick Davis was called Porridge.
There's Neil Gaiman's Cybermen. Like, that's at least 7 different factions of Cybermen. It's like somehow history just repeats and there's always going to be a Cyberman. Like, humanity just love fucking turning themselves into Cybermen.
I think New Who needs like a definitive statement. Yeah, this is where the Cybermen come from and all that. Like, I hope when Russell T Davies takes the reins over again, he just does a Cyberman episode as if it's the first Cyberman episode, you know? Mm-hmm. He just explains where they're from, and that's where it will stay. And
honestly, I would be chill with them being, like, I would be chill with them being the alternate universe Cyberman, and they're also being Cyberman from Mondas. Like, that, like, I feel like that's enough. You don't need to continuously keep making Cybermen. Yeah.
What do you think of the Cybermen voices? Well, I really like their voices.
So this voice is very similar, if not the exact same, as the voice that we covered last year with Tomb of the Cybermen, is it not? They sound...
No, the Tomb of the Cybermen voices were very robotic-y. This is a different voice completely.
But Tomb of the Cybermen is the one with William Hartnell, isn't it? Not William Hartnell, fucking Patrick Troughton.
I will send you a clip of Tomb of the Cybermen.
Because in my head, they talk basically the same, because they are doing the, like, long, low inflections. Like,
Tomb of the Cybermen are very slow. They speak like this.
Interesting. This voice feels familiar to me. I feel like we've had Cybermen with this sounding voice before.
I don't think we have, no.
Interesting. What I do, like, the voice itself, I think, is fine. It's definitely up there, I think, as not the worst. It's got the benefit of it's not boring to listen to and it's comprehensible. The thing that I think is the most interesting and probably my favorite bit about this Cyberman design is its mouth. When it talks, it's not moving its lips up and down. It is just opening its mouth hole. It is just bah. And then all the words are coming out. It's so fucking, like, that's an actual creepy idea. Like, I really like that.
The voice in the script was described as flat, but not Dalek-ish, hard in tone. But Derek Marinus didn't want this idea, and voice actor Roy Skelton agreed with him. They wanted a more inhumane and eerie voice. They wanted to make it sound computer-generated, with voices, with words changing pitch each time. And you think about auto-tuning, it sounds very much like auto-tune. The mouth opens and closes to show that the voice is coming artificially from equipment inside their bodies. And, yeah, it really works for me.
Yeah, I really like that idea. It's a very good idea.
Because if you think about modern Cybermen, we don't really have mouths. We just kind of...
Like, I think, whenever I think of modern Cybermen, I always think of Russell T Davis's ones, which is just like a LED light that lights up.
Yeah.
You know?
Modern Cybermen to me sound very similar to the Daleks, except less emotion, which is... Yeah, I don't like the Cybermen sounding too much like robots. I like them having some form of humanity inside of them, even though it's obscure, like in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've never had a problem with any Cyberman voice of New Who, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, also in this episode, they show a news broadcast of them being like, oh yeah, there's a twin planet now, which I guess was a big revelation in the Doctor Who universe in 1985 or 86, which never gets mentioned again.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Also, the news broadcast is hilariously cheap. I think it's the cheapest looking part of this entire episode. It is. Yeah. It's rough looking, like it's just a piece of paper on a wall. It's brilliant. It is brilliant.
But the whole idea of the news broadcast reminds me of a Russell T Davies episode. You know, you want to show what's going on in the planet, you just cut to news footage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But not too much else happens. Somebody hits the emergency alarm, and that sends a signal to Europe. The Cyberman's like, "Hey, that was stupid. Turn it off, and tell everybody it's okay." The guy refuses and gets knocked unconscious, and they just get another guy to do it. And it's, I guess, a bit of tension that happens in the episode.
I do like that the Cybermen aren't just here to kill people. We have a plan. They're like, oh yeah, we don't want to kill you. We just want to fuck off of this planet. Just use its resources and just fuck off. That's all we want to do. Yeah.
I think it's a really strong introduction for a villain. Like, I think that they're presented as not even like, you know, like the Daleks come in and they're like, oh, we just want to kill and, you know, whatever the fuck, and you get your mustache twirling villains and whatever the fuck. These ones just come in and they're like, hey, this is happening. You just got to be okay with it because we are better than you. Yeah. Like, you know, they're just an intimidating presence.
There's also a level of tragedy behind them. You know, they just wanted to survive. Yeah. We didn't. I don't think they intended to get rid of their emotions, but you know, as they become more machine, we've wind up losing our emotions, and that's what drives them from now on. They just want to survive rather than take over the whole world like every Cyberman story seems to want to do these days.
Yeah. So the episode continues in a... I guess you could say the plot moves forward a bit more as the Cybermen continue to give orders to people and are like, hey, everybody's going to come with us to Mondas and we're going to completely strip this planet of resources. It's going to be a fucking chill time. Nobody seems to be on board with this. Fucking Mr. Benjamin, the companion, is like, I'm going to shoot this guy with a gun, which never seems to work out well for anybody, as the Cyberman grabs the gun and uses its ultimate power of strength to kind of bend it. It's I guess it would have been an impressive effect for the time. Yeah. You know, it would have been pretty,
definitely.
Yeah, it would have been pretty spooky. But they take Ben into the projection room, which I guess is all the rage in a 1986 science facility in the far future. So he gets separated from everybody. That's a thing with these Cybermen, is they are a lot less warmongering than Cybermen will become. These ones are much more just like, hey, we're just kind of like, we want to do this thing. Okay, please don't get in our way. Like,
yeah, like I said, all they want to do is survive, and they don't really want to hurt people. They just want to survive, and that means just locking somebody in a room. That's the best alternative, really.
Yeah, rather than just killing them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we cut to our friends in the spaceship trying to land and get away from Mondas, and this is a very long scene. With them doing science things in the ship. It doesn't really feel like Doctor Who. It feels like an old sci-fi film, but I kind of dig it. You know, it's kind of nice to just sit and watch them be like, oh, your auxiliary 3.5 needs to be changed by 2.7, and then he's like, oh, I will change it by 2.7. Oh, and he pulls like a lever. But it doesn't work out for them as they, try moving with the thrusters, run out of fuel, and then explode. Although we don't see them explode, obviously due to budget reasons.
Yeah.
I think it's done pretty cleverly with the TV just cutting out, and you're just kind of wish they left it vague, where it's like they've just gone missing. They've blopped off the radar. We don't know what's happened to them. They must be dead. But the doctor's just like, no, they 100% exploded. But he doesn't tell anybody else. He only tells it to fucking Poppy. He's like, Poppy, come here. Guess what? They fucking blew up.
Yeah, the Doctor doesn't really have much interaction with the rest of the cast, apart from the companions. They feel so separated from all the events going on. He's just a spectator. He's just like, yeah, this is what's going on. This is what's happening for the audience at home, so they can understand what probably happened.
Yeah. We then, we cut to Ben inside his little theater room with the projector, and he's using a screwdriver, which made me go, whoa, it's a screwdriver, because obviously this is quite a few years before the screwdriver came into existence, the sonic screwdriver, that is, so it's a fun little bit of accidental foreshadowing. As Ben is like, hey, let's make the most obscure solution to this puzzle possible. I'm going to turn the projector around, turn it on, play some random cowboy film, invite a Cyberman in, and he will for sure be blinded by the projector. Now, I don't know if you've ever walked in front of a projector. It's not really so bright that you're going to go, oh my god, I'm blind, ah! It's like, oh, that's kind of bright.
And even if it was so bright but it blinded you, the Cybermen would have removed that weakness, so they wouldn't be blinded in the first place.
Yeah. But this Cyberman clearly didn't have that upgrade, as it gets blinded when Ben calls it in and he steals its torch gun thing from it. Yeah. It's an interesting looking gun. He steals it from it, and he's like, hey, stay back or I'm going to shoot you. And the Cyberman just keeps coming, goes to karate chop him, and he shoots it dead. And he's like, oh, you didn't give me no alternative. It's a very BBC way of saying, I had no choice to do this. He says it so formally.
Yeah, Ben spends the whole of the episode left, he just feels so much guilt for killing that Cyberman, even though it was self-defense, but it feels like it was note from the BBC, you have to be careful not to show your heroes killing anybody, because otherwise kids will try to imitate it somehow. They'll grab the light.
They'll grab their big laser light guns and start shooting up everybody. We then go to the Cybermen and we learn a bit more about them, as we learn that they have removed themselves of all emotion to the point that they're no longer even sure what emotion is. They don't know what feelings are. And the Doctor's like, come on, emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. I feel like Hartnell really enjoyed the hate one. That's the emotion that he...
This is probably the first Doctor's last big speech. It's not even a big speech. It's just
barely a speech. Yeah,
it's like a few sentences.
Really. Yeah, which is a shame.
But it is iconic.
Yeah, it's all right, but it's a shame because Hartnell, when he wanted to, could give a good speech. Like the speech where he's saying goodbye to Susan is a fucking awesome speech. Like, it's the speech when I saw it, I was like, oh shit, he is actually the Doctor. I could see the Doctor in between that, like,
Yeah, but that speech is like comes after he just abandons his grandchild.
Yeah, he's still a dick about it. Like, we then get a very interesting shot, and I don't know what they were thinking with this shot. As we see the general guy lying down, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so confused as where I am," and then we start panning out, and we keep going out, and we zoom out in between a Cyberman's legs, and the Cyberman is posing as if it's fucking Riker from Star Trek, legs as far apart as possible, up on a ledge, and we see the general in between his legs, looking at his ass. It's the weirdest shot I've ever seen in Classic Who. I don't know what was going on with it.
It's a weird shot, but at least it's semi-creative for a studio setting,
Yeah.
Usually these sort of episodes would just be shot flatly, But at least we're trying to some artistic angle here, even though it doesn't make any sense in context. Why is a Cyberman standing like that? We'll never know.
We'll never know. But Ben sneaks in and he hands the gun over to the General, and the General just goes fucking mental, shooting Cybermen left and right, absolutely destroying them. Which is a kind of, weak ending to the Cybermen in this episode. They just kind of get shot and die. Which, although to be fair, that's the solution to every Classic Who villain.
Yeah, but like the Cybermen getting destroyed by their own weapons feels very stupid. Like, why don't the Cybermen create a weapon that can kill humans and not themselves? Like, why is their weapons more effective against them than the humans?
Maybe there's a lot of like civil wars on Mondas. Maybe things aren't as peachy as they want to let on. You know, maybe you just need to fight get a few other Cybermen. You know, we don't know Mondas's politics. But speaking of politics, we get a phone call from the other guy that's in Europe, I guess, and he starts talking to the general for a long time. The bulk of the remainder of this episode is this phone call, where the general's like, oh, by the way, we didn't tell you, but we sent up another dude into space to try and rescue those two other dudes that exploded. And the general's like, oh, okay, so you want us to get him back? And he's like, yeah. Also, by the way, it was like your son. We sent your son up, and the general's like, "You realize you've just killed my son," and this, which I think, as much as I would have liked an establishment that the general has a son, I think it is really good motivation for what the general starts doing, where he just starts becoming like, fucking all guns going, let's go, we are going to go destroy Mondas. It's wartime because I've got to save my son. It at least gives him a motivation.
Yeah, this cast of characters at least have some sense of motivation, some sort of characteristics, It feels real, even though you don't get a sense of who his son was before this phone call. Like, he never mentioned his son before this, like, I don't know.
We don't even
like,
see him.
Least,
we don't even see his son, does he?
Write a scene where he's on the phone to his son before shit goes down.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm so proud of you, etc., etc. You're going off on this big mission, and then it turns out the big mission is related to him, and oh my god, I have to get my son back.
Yeah. Or you could go the opposite way, and the general's not happy with his son, They have like a disagreement over the phone.
Yeah.
Then the next thing he finds out is his son went off up on this rocket to try and prove himself, and he's like, oh fuck, I've just killed my own boy, but I'm going to blame you about it.
But really, I would say he's the main character of this episode, the general dude. Like, the Doctor isn't the main character of this episode, it's general. It's really weird.
The Doctor's not a main episode of this entire story until, I guess, he regenerates, because he doesn't do anything. Like, in this entire episode, I think he maybe has 10 lines.
he just stands around being like, oh, I know what will happen.
And then doesn't tell anybody.
And I know what's happening. Yeah, he just knows what's happening. He's just an observer. It's very strange for Doctor Who.
Yeah, it is really, really strange. But this is where we find out that it seems like it's going to be the first interplanetary war between Earth and Mondas. I skipped over that in history class, apparently.
As did most Doctor Who characters,
Yeah.
We never get a Doctor Who episode where they're like, oh yes, I remember a Cyberman. We went to war with them in 1986.
I would love for that to randomly happen in New Who. Like, just this random person that remembers the Interplanetary War of 1986. But this is when the general starts shouting at the companions and the Doctor. Mainly starts shouting at Poppy, because Poppy's like, you seem to be enjoying this. Polly, whatever. You seem to be enjoying this. And the guy's like, my son is up there. He's just really telling us more of his motivation. He's like, I've got a reason to be doing this. And then they're like, oh my god, look at the radar. There's a heap of them on the dots. They're moving quickly. And then the episode ends with basically saying that the Cybermen are coming to attack. Look at their formation of a cube. It made me think of the Borg.
But decent effects on the screen. This is like them moving paper behind the scenes, just moving paper so all the dots just move. It's really creative. It looks pretty decent. Great production value on this episode, I would say.
Yeah. It's a very small scale episode because it all takes place in this one room essentially. But when they do go out and do like the effect shots, like the rocket launch, or I say rocket launch at the time when the rocket's flying, the rocket launch is just fucking stock footage, or like this. Like the effects for this one are decent enough that you don't get taken out of it, except for that snow machine in episode 1.
But like on a 12-inch screen in 1966, you'd buy it completely as a kid. Nowadays we're kind of spoiled with all the special effects, like Marvel movies and all that. On a 55-inch screen, It's decent for its time.
Absolutely it is. But that does bring us to the end of episode 2. And what are your thoughts, Scott, on the first 2 parts of this story?
Yeah, it's a very strange story overall. We'll probably talk more about it next week. We will. It's hard to get my teeth into it. It's a fine Cyberman story. It's a fine introduction for a Cyberman. I just wish the Doctor was more active in his first meeting with a Cyberman. It's so strange to watch him not really interact with him much, apart from that one speech he does.
Yeah, if you could even call it a speech. I think I enjoy episode 2 a lot more than episode 1. Episode 1 does the thing that every episode 1 Doctor Who story does, where it's setting up, it's establishing, so it's giving us, all the characters we don't care about, and then it ends with, oh my god, there's a monster here, which is fine. Episode 2, I think I like a bit more because it just feels like a sci-fi film. It doesn't feel like Doctor Who at all at this point because, as you said, the Doctor's not in it. It just feels like I'm watching a sci-fi, like an old sci-fi movie, and I'm kind of on board with it. I'm kind of digging it.
Yeah. It feels more like a backdoor pilot, It feels like they wanted a spin-off show with these kind of with this NASA base fighting the aliens every week or something.
Yeah.
It feels like a backdoor pilot, but
it's not. It's just Hartnell didn't want to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was decent enough. I think it's definitely a really solid opening for the Cybermen. I think it's one of the classic villains, and I think this is a really solid way to introduce them. It's a very different way to introduce them as well. Yeah. They're not like regular Doctor Who villains that just go around killing everybody or like, oh, I'm going to take over the world. They're just they're essentially just scientists. Yeah. It's a very interesting take for a villain. But that does bring us to the end of the episode. We will be back next week with what, Scott?
Yeah, the 10th Planet Part 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Which are very two weird parts for Doctor Who, because Part 3 doesn't have a Doctor at all because he was too ill to go in. And Part 4 is entirely animated. So
which will be our first animated episode. And also, so this is our first hello and goodbye to Hartnell as the Doctor, for last ever time he's on screen. Which is depressing, I guess. It's kind of a lackluster way to end his run as the Doctor, isn't it? But we will be back next week with those episodes. In the meantime, you can find us on Facebook at Who Watches Who, on Twitter at Watches Doctor, on YouTube at Who Watches Who, where this podcast is available in video form. It's also available in audio form wherever you listen to podcasts. There's a heap of links in the description. Also, send us an email. I usually say that bit first. Totally forgot to say it. What do you think of William Hartnell as a Doctor? Send us an email at whowatcheswhopod@gmail.com. That's whowatcheswhopod@gmail.com, and we will read it out at the end of the month in our news roundup podcast. Probably going to be a big news podcast this month because maybe Jodie's actually regenerating, maybe, possibly, who knows? But until then, we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.